What's good, Modern Retro Show family? It's Teacher Eddie back with another history reaction for Fan Friday. So this reaction request comes from our newest Hall of Fame Patreon, Freeman Stephenson. So Freeman asked me to react to the Battle of Castle Itter. This is one of the most fascinating stories out of World War II, and I love doing this type of history. This is that history that doesn't get taught. A lot of people don't know about this stuff, so this is right up my alley. So thank you, Freeman, for not only supporting the show, patreon.com/modernretroshow, but also for the fascinating suggestion and request for this month. So without further ado, let's get into it.
The National Redoubt, an expression that began to appear in Allied circles during the last months of the war. What did it mean? Well, German propaganda had successfully fooled the Allies into believing that Hitler, along with a few die-hard SS divisions, would make a last stand in the Alps of southern Germany and western Austria. It seemed plausible. After all, Hitler's private home, the Berghof, was located below the infamous Eagle's Nest in southern Bavaria near the town of Berchtesgaden. The complex of Nazi leaders' homes and barracks had extensive underground command facilities, and the mountain passes into the region could be easily defended by determined units. Some German units had indeed pulled back into the region. In order to smash the Alpine redoubt before it could be properly established, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander, diverted armies.
That is one of the dopest names ever, right? Supreme Allied Commander. But yeah, this is something, again, that really doesn't get covered, because the battle for the Itter Castle takes place after Hitler's already committed suicide, right? So victory is already declared, but there are, of course, some, SS units that are still, trying to, fight. A lot of them don't even know that Hitler had committed suicide. But this is actually covered very well in Band of Brothers. Now, I haven't seen Band of Brothers since it came out like 20-something years ago. But I remember there was an episode where the American troops do go in search of, these private residences that the Nazis, including, of course, Hitler's private residence in the Swiss Alps. And they were super disappointed. They were ready to find, treasures and all these different things. And they were kind of disappointed, even though, of course, the houses were sprawling and beautiful and all these things. But, it's kind of like when Geraldo Rivera in the 80s went into Al Capone's safe. And then after the whole build-up, they get the safe open. There was like a 2-hour television special, and there's nothing in the safe, right? But the Battle of Itter is going to be very interesting because it marks, I believe, the only time that American and German forces fight side by side. So I'm sure they're going to explain and get into it.
South to capture the region, some of the last parts of Europe held by the Germans at the end of the war. The region served useful military purposes for the Germans, with some secret production facilities located there, as well as hideaways for looted art and bullion. It was also somewhere useful to hold special prisoners. As nations fell to the German army in 1939-40, the political and military leaders of defeated nations who fell into German hands were treated as VIP prisoners, a sort of insurance for a rainy day. Lodged in reasonable comfort in fortresses and castles around Germany and Austria, they were hostages. They became more valuable to the regime as its power faded. At Castle Itter in western Austria, a host of French dignitaries were held prisoner in splendid isolation. Schloss Itter was located.
Yeah, in Castle Itter, they had, I believe, 2 prime ministers, plenty of dignitaries. They also had some athletes in there. The only athlete I remember is a tennis star who's going to play a vital role once the fighting begins. But when they say, held captive, of course they were held captive. They were not allowed to leave. They were prisoners. But they weren't prisoners like we think of POWs. I mean, they were literally put up in these castles, and they had all the amenities that you could imagine. and they were treated, fairly well, for prisoners, of course.
90 kilometers west of Hitler's Alpine headquarters at the Obersalzberg, a medieval fortress constructed atop a 2,180-foot knoll at the entrance to the Brixental Valley, 20 kilometers or 12 miles west of Kitzbühel. The original Schloss was hundreds of years old and had belonged to the Archbishops of Salzburg, then Bavaria, and latterly Austria from 1816 onwards. The present castle was built on the site of the older structures in 18...
Of course, the Archbishop of Salzburg, for those who have seen Amadeus, of course, are going to be very familiar with that. Of course, Mozart can't wait to leave Salzburg, right? Which is where he was born in Austria. And, of course, he wants to get away from his father, but he also wants to go to the capitals where music is king, right?
78, and purchased in 1884 by Franz Liszt's student, the pianist Sophie Mentor. Liszt and Tchaikovsky both composed at the castle. Sold in 1902, it became a hotel until handed over to the SS in 1940. In 1940...
Okay, hold on one second. I just want to make sure I heard that right.
Until handed over to the SS in
Handed over to the SS. That's like saying you handed over your wallet to the guy holding you at gunpoint. Yeah, that's a very polite way of saying it.
1940. In 1943, the SS converted it into a prison for VIP prisoners, run as a subcamp of the notorious Dachau concentration camp. The prisoners were all French and a who's who of 1930s society. There were two former French prime ministers, Edouard Daladier and Paul Reynaud. Two important generals from the 1940 Battle of France, Maurice Gamelin and Maxime Weygand. There were also former officials of the Vichy French regime, the puppet state created by the Nazis in what they called unoccupied France. The General Commissioner of Sports, the international tennis champion Jean Borotra, and French right-wing leader...
So, again, Borotra, remember that name. That's going to come into... there's going to be an interesting story about that.
François Delaroque, trade union leader Léon Jouot, and politician André-François Poncet, the son of World War I Prime Minister Georges Clemenceau, Michel Clemenceau, and General de Gaulle's sister, Marie-Agnes. A number of Eastern
I did not know that. I didn't know that de Gaulle's sister was also there. That's cool.
Concentration camp
not cool for her, of course.
The VIP prisoners and the upkeep of the castle, which was commanded by SS-Hauptsturmführer or Captain Sebastian Wimmer and a detachment of 25 guards from Dachau. Orders had been issued that Wimmer should kill his prisoners rather than allow their capture and release by the advancing US forces. In late April 1945, Clemenceau, Reynaud, and Gamelin had spoken to Wimmer about this order. Wimmer said that he wouldn't kill them if it came to it, but the prisoners noted daily visits by heavily armed SS...
Yeah, that is one of the unfortunate... This is why I want to do, like I said, I want to do a lot more original videos. I want to call it, the name I come up with so far is History Beyond. So I really want to cover things that don't get covered normally in history videos, and especially in school, right? So currently I'm working on a video about the African Americans who escape America in the 1800s, and some of them go to Canada, some go to Mexico, but a lot actually go to Russia, which we never talk about. And there's a lot of interesting history there. But also one of the things I want to do is what happened to the people in the concentration camps when the war ended. Because a lot of people think they were liberated, but the horrors continue for years and years at the hands of the Allies themselves. I mean, it is just absolutely awful what these people have to continue to endure. So, again, the orders did come down after Hitler's death to kill as many of the prisoners that were left. So, unfortunately, could you imagine you make it through years of, being in a concentration camp, and you're literally just days away from, having these officers arrested, and they just start mowing people down. I mean, it is just so heartbreaking.
SS officers, often accompanied by their families, who were using Schloss Itter as a rest stop as they fled the Americans. On the 30th of April, none other than the German commandant of Dachau concentration camp, Eduard Weiter, arrived. Dachau, with all its horrors, had been liberated by US forces the day before, on the 29th of April. Weiter's last act before leaving Dachau was to order the execution of 2,000 inmates. However, on the morning of the 2nd of May 1945, Weiter shot himself at Castle Itter. Commandant Wimmer now knew that the game was up. He packed up and with his wife fled on the 4th of May. The SS guards, now leaderless, also did the same and disappeared. With the SS gone, the prisoners broke into the armory and took rifles, pistols, and machine pistols to protect themselves. What they feared most was the arrival of another SS unit that might kill them. The region around the castle was still firmly in German hands.
Yeah, so a lot of people may think, well, look, if everybody left and they got all these weapons, why didn't they just leave the castle? So the castle was abandoned, but the issue was there were still a lot of German forces surrounding the outer parts of the castle and still ready to defend. So they would have had to get into gunfights to try to escape. And again, a lot of these prisoners were older people. I mean, they weren't really in fighting shape, right?
The French decided to send someone to make contact with the advancing Americans so the castle could be liberated. The castle's electrician, Zvonimir Kukovic, a Yugoslav resistance member, agreed to take a bicycle and go look for help, carrying a letter from the inmates written in English. At the town of Wörgl, 6 miles northwest of the castle, Kukovic happened upon Major Josef Gangl, who was now working for the Austrian resistance. He sent Kukovic...
Josef Gangl, again, remember that name. He is going to become a major, if not the major player in defending this castle. So I don't want to get too much into Gangl right now. I'll supplement it if they don't cover some points, but he becomes a national hero in Austria for his actions at the castle.
Major Josef Gangl, who was now working for the Austrian resistance. He sent Kukovic on to Innsbruck, 64 kilometers or 40 miles from Castle Itter. Innsbruck was in American hands, and he ran into a platoon from the 409th Infantry Regiment, US XXI Division. News of the prize at Itter was passed up the chain of command. In the meantime, Major Gangl and 20 Wehrmacht soldiers who had changed sides set off for American lines heading for Kufstein in a Kübelwagen and a truck. The 103rd Infantry Division also launched a rescue plan. Major John Kramers, 103rd Military Government Officer, together with French Liaison Officer Lieutenant Eric Lutin, created a small task force to liberate the castle. It consisted of 4 M10 tank destroyers, 3 jeeps, and a truck carrying a platoon from the 411th Infantry Regiment. 2 war correspondents accompanied the task force. But the task force was stopped by German artillery fire several miles short of Wörgl. At Kufstein, Major Gangl was taken under a white flag to the headquarters of the 23rd Tank Battalion. This US unit decided to also mount a rescue effort. First Lieutenant Jack Lee was to command the mission from his Sherman tank Besotten Jenny, accompanied by another Sherman named Boschbuster. Lee's 8-man unit was joined by 6 members of the African-American 17th Armored Infantry Battalion riding on the tanks, and Gangl and his 20 Wehrmacht soldiers riding in their German army vehicles. The 2 tanks...
So imagine, I don't know how this has not been made into a movie yet. This story is so amazing. Not just the fact that it's the war, Hitler's already killed himself, the war's over, but now they got to storm a medieval castle to save a bunch of French dignitaries and VIPs while surrounded by the last remnants of the Third Reich. And you get the greatest crossover ever. You thought Avengers Endgame was a great crossover? Pardon me. It's like 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm on 2 hours sleep. But again, putting that work in. You got former German soldiers who have now switched over. You got American soldiers. You got African American soldiers teaming up. You got French prisoners who, surprisingly enough, are not going to be too happy to see this force of people come to rescue them. I'm sure Mark Felton's going to touch on it. But this story has all the makings of an amazing, like, you don't have to dramatize anything. All the drama's already here.
14 Americans and 21 Germans set off from Wörgl late in the afternoon. News arrived that the SS regiment that had pulled out of Wörgl when the 23rd Tank Battalion had arrived had mined the one major bridge over the river in the valley. Gangl's men removed the explosives, but Lee left Boschbuster at the bridge to protect the way back to Wörgl. 4 miles later, Lee, with Gangl's men, drove into Itter. Turning a corner, they had a sudden but fierce battle with SS who were in the process of setting up a roadblock, driving them away. Besotten Jenny then drove to the castle's main gate. The French VIPs were extremely underwhelmed by the tiny rescue force. Lee didn't get along with the French leaders at all. Lee's plan was to stay put and wait to be relieved by US forces. At 11 p.m., SS machine guns opened up on the castle from the surrounding hills. Lee's men and Gangl's Wehrmacht troops returned fire. At dawn, the SS opened up with machine guns and an 88mm anti-tank gun. The Sherman, Besotten Jenny, was knocked out at the main gate, burning fiercely. SS troops now surged forward in a general assault on the castle. The firing from both sides was intense. French VIPs Renaud, Clemenceau, Larocque and Borotra also armed themselves and joined in the fight. Several of Gangl's men were killed or wounded, and Gangl was himself shot in the head and killed by a sniper.
So Gangl is the only casualty on the forces that defend the castle. So Mark Felton mentioned there were several other who were shot, but they were wounded. They didn't die. So Gangl is the only one who dies. He's hit by a sniper's bullet while trying to protect one of the prime ministers. I forget which one. So Gangl, of course, becomes a national hero in Austria. He receives posthumous decorations. I think they name a street after him. But I also want to correct one point. I realized when they were so Hitler had committed suicide at this point. So the battle takes place a few days after Hitler commits suicide, but I believe it takes place either 1 or 2 days before Germany officially surrenders. So I do have to correct myself when I said that, the German forces hadn't heard of the surrender. What I meant to say was they may not have heard of Hitler's suicide. But this does take place either a day or two before the official surrender of Germany.
But riding to the castle's rescue came Major Kremers and his task force from Innsbruck. The M10s joined the Sherman, Boschbuster at the bridge, 4 miles away. But Kremers and 3 other men in a jeep met up with reconnaissance elements, the 2nd Battalion, 142nd Infantry Regiment. Reconnaissance tanks and half-tracks, led by Boschbuster, moved towards the castle. But the situation at the castle was critical. Ammunition was running out. Jean Borotra volunteered to try and guide Kramer's relief force to the castle.
So again, Jean Borotra, if you remember, like I said, remember the tennis player's name? So this is when he plays a major role in this battle. So pay attention to this part.
Jean Borotra volunteered to try and guide Kramer's relief force to the castle. During a lull in the firing, Borotra managed to slip out, eluding SS in the woods, and reach Kramer's. At the castle, Lee proposed...
Oh, by the way, he didn't just, because he's saying he slipped out, he scaled an entire wall by himself. It's such an amazing story. It's all in the details. So Borotra doesn't just slip out. He scales walls. He's like Batman. Absolutely amazing.
To make a last stand in the central tower, fighting the SS floor to floor if necessary. The SS pressed forward towards the main entrance, but the appearance of the US armor behind them changed their minds.
Yeah.
The SS broke and fled.
Changed their minds quick, son. When they rolled up from behind them, they're like, all right, yeah, this is over.
Under a hail of machine gun and rifle bullets as Boschbuster drove up the road towards the castle. The VIPs were saved, as was Lee.
Yeah, he didn't mention it, so I got to mention this because only the French, right? Only the French. So when the Allied forces and the German Wehrmacht officers roll up with Gangl, so you got this ragtag group of Americans, Germans fighting by the side of American, Germans fighting with African Americans, you'd be like, oh my God, this is like the greatest crossover ever. The French were so pissed off. They were so disappointed because these are VIPs, right? We got former prime ministers and generals. We got de Gaulle's sister. You know, we got tennis stars. So they were expecting their rescue to be like this grand spectacle. Like they were literally waiting for something like Endgame. They were waiting for the entire world of superheroes to show up and save them. And they're like, really? We get a bunch of former Nazis, a couple of black guys. Again, we're talking about the France in the 40s. You know, we got some black guys, we got a couple of Americans here. Like, what is this crap? Like, where's the champagne toasts and where's the caviar and the cigarettes? And like, they're waiting for this grand spectacle, but only the French would be pissed off that their rescue wasn't big enough for them. It's just, like I said, you can't write this stuff. This is already written, man. Just make a movie.
His own GIs and the survivors of Major Gangl's Wehrmacht unit. Jack Lee received the Distinguished Service Cross and promotion to captain. Gangl was posthumously honoured as an Austrian national hero.
Yes.
It was the 5th of May 1945, 3 days before the end of the war in Europe. The Battle of Castle Itter is often erroneously described as the only time US and German forces fought together in World War II. In fact, there was one other time at war's end when this occurred, in the Czech Republic, when a US reconnaissance unit joined forces with German Wehrmacht, Russian Cossacks, and Allied POWs to save the Lipizzaner horses, the famous Spanish riding school.
All right, I didn't know that, but yeah, Lipizzaner horses. The only reference to Lipizzaner horses I remember is from the movie Crimson Tide, 1995, with Gene Hackman and Denzel Washington. Great movie, by the way. And Gene Hackman tries to prove a point that the greatest horses in the world are Lipizzaner stallions, he calls them. And they're born, and they're white, right? Because Denzel Washington's black, of course, so he's trying to make a snide remark. And Denzel Washington reminds him, yes, they grow up to be white, but Lipizzaner stallions are actually born black. Snap Denzel, check and mate. But yeah, I didn't know that, so that's interesting, of course.
From 2 SS attacks, the subject of my book, Ghost Riders, available in all good bookshops.
Nice crossover.
Thanks for watching. Please subscribe.
Absolutely. So please subscribe. I'm going to leave the original link to Mark Felton's video. Of course, Mark Felton absolutely does great work when it comes to history. So much respect. This was absolutely awesome. I loved it. I hope you enjoyed it. And again, I'm going to try to make my own original histories as well. Videos. So far, I've done a couple. I did the business plot, which is another amazing story when American businessmen try to overthrow Roosevelt and create a fascist dictatorship in America. I did the mystery of Tank Man in Tiananmen Square. And the next one, like I said, is going to be the Black Diaspora to Moscow in the 1800s. And then I got some others planned for the future. So thank you guys. Thank you for watching. Thank you to Freeman Stephenson. And check out another video or check out a playlist. I'm Eddie, been Modern Retro Show, and we'll see you next time.